can.
Okay.
Lovely.
This isn't the first, I'm sorry, I have to go back to the beginning here.
Sure.
All right. Sorry, I didn't have it on the first slide right away. So welcome, and I appreciate the invitation to speak for you. I gave a talk at Riveredge.
Whoops. So Eddie, you're going to need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. There we go.
So you were not hearing me before? Sorry.
I just muted everybody at once, and so that included you, so you had to re-unmute yourself.
All right, so here we go. All right, thank you. Thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. I appreciate it. I did give a talk similar to this at Riveredge in November of 2019. If any of you were at that talk, you might remember. A little bit of this will be somewhat familiar if you were there, but most of it will be a little different. And so I hope you'll enjoy that, even if you saw me the first time. This is my introduction. I always like to introduce a talk with the place where I'm presenting. And so I love Riveredge, of course. The talk will be about, as Mary said, I spearhead this project we're calling A Wealth of Nature, Parks and Natural Areas in Southeastern Wisconsin. And I will tell you much more about this in a minute, but I want to continue with the orientation. As I say, I like to orient my talks to the place. And this was a picture I took just last week. I was up there. I live in Wauwatosa, so I'm afraid I don't get to Riveredge as often as I'd like to. I love Riveredge, and I get there as often as I can. And last week I happened to be in the area, and I stopped in because the colors were fantastic. If you've been there in the past week, I'm sure you noticed that. This is your sugar bush house, a fairly new facility. So these are all a few pictures that I've taken, not recently, most of them. Most of them are over the past number of years when I've gotten up there now and then. But these are all from Riveredge. You have a series of tree construction or stick constructions out in the woods, which I've always appreciated. These are rough blazing star flowers, the Milwaukee River. Of course, you're familiar with May apples, but have you seen them from this point of view?
Wow.
I really enjoy taking pictures from this point of view, and this is what's known in photography as a worm's eye view. And I enjoy doing worm's eye views, but I've never actually gotten down on the physical ground before I got a cell phone, because you can actually put the cell phone down on the ground and you can take worm's eye views almost literally, much more easily than you used to be able to with a camera. But even when it's not literally on the ground, like this picture, this is also known as a worm's eye view. This is a beech tree clump, which is on the Riveredge grounds. This is your pier out in the river. This was an event, which I'm going to mention again in a few minutes, at Treasures of Oz. Of course, you raise baby sturgeons there, and here are some of them in a tank. Okay, so Preserve Our Parks. This is in association with the organization. I'm on their board. Preserve Our Parks. When I'm doing this in person, I really enjoy interacting with the group and asking questions and that sort of thing. But under these circumstances, that's difficult. So if you have questions that I'm not answering along the way, please write them down in the chat room so you don't forget them. And then when we get to the end, we can go over your questions, because I'm sure there will be questions. I mean, I encourage questions, and so I'd like to know what you'd like to know. The best way to run one of these talks is to learn what the audience would like to know and follow from there. But we in a nutshell, we protect and promote Milwaukee area parks. And this project is 6-county project. So we run through, and the project is called A Wealth of Nature. The project runs through Ozaukee, Washington, Milwaukee, Waukesha, Racine, and Kenosha counties. So it's a big area to cover. And I'll tell you a bit more about that area as we run along. The mission of the project is simply to get people to enjoy and support the parks, literally to get outside. We believe in these principles. So Milwaukee is often not considered to be one of the destinations for places you go to see nature, unlike some other cities. I mean, obviously, national parks and places out in the country, out in the wilderness areas are destinations, but some cities actually promote themselves as destinations to see nature. And when you think of a city that has some natural features or natural resources that are promoted, we often think of places like San Francisco, like Portland, Oregon. But I'd like to suggest that Milwaukee can compete. We have some world-class natural features here, and we should promote them more. So this is pretty much what we're trying to do with this project. We would like to get people to enjoy more, as I said, and one of our most important principles is sharing our experiences with the younger generation. This is an event, butterfly tagging event at Forest Beach Migratory Preserve. The project, A Wealth of Nature, has a website and a number of project components. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to spend a little time sharing what we do on our website. I'm obviously giving a presentation right now, so that's an example of a presentation. We're on Facebook and we're on Instagram, so you can follow us at, or not at, hashtag A Wealth of Nature if you want to check us out on Facebook or on Instagram. I also lead outings, but I'm not going to go into that unless somebody has a question. So we're going to talk a little bit about the website. This is, if you go to the website and you reach the home page, this is the top of our home page. If you scroll down just a moment, you will get to a listing of our most recent blog posts. And I'm going to share with you some of the kinds of stories that we post on our blog, starting with, I didn't see Ed Mikowski's name, so I don't think he's with us today, but Ed sent us a very short story, but some pictures he took of this phenomenon, which I'd never heard of, called needle ice, and you're seeing the pictures here. So to me, it looks like a piece of charred wood, but it isn't. It's ice. And if you read the story, I'm not going to tell you the whole story in any of these cases. So if you have any more questions beyond what I'm explaining of the stories, please let me know. The stories are all available on our blog and you can search for them. So if you go to the website and you use the search function to look for needle ice, you'll get this story right away. Here's a series of pictures I took of a controlled burn that was not at Riveredge, but Matt Smith, who is your natural areas coordinator, or I'm not sure what his exact title is, but he's the land steward, and he was there to help facilitate this burning. In fact, this is a picture of Matt out in the fire. I love photographing burns. So this is a controlled burn, which is intended to help facilitate the growth of native plants in the prairie and to get rid of non-native plants, which it's useful for. when they're all done, they put it out, of course. So that's just a very brief example of how one of these stories unfolds through photography. Much of the photography is my own, but it isn't necessarily like the ones that I showed you that Matt sent. He took those pictures. Something that I've covered every year since we started was Treasures of Oz, which is a wonderful program. I'm sure you're all familiar with Treasures of Oz. So it's one of the best countywide programs I've ever seen for natural areas. And this was the one from 2018, which featured Riveredge. Here's another. This is from that tour at Riveredge. Can you see my arrow?
Yep.
Some of you probably know Kate Redmond, who is in the picture in the background here. This may be somebody who's with us, I don't know.
Yes, it's Fred. He's one of the Streamside Brewing Facility monitors, and Ralph works with him on Thursday.
There you go. This was a display that was down by next to the river. Riveredge also, as I'm sure all of you know, hosts the annual Sturgeon Fest, and I've also been posting stories and pictures about that. In 2018, I took these pictures, among others, that I posted along with a story about Sturgeon Fest. In 2019, someone else, his name is Peter Dargutz, brought his two little kids and took pictures of them at Sturgeon Fest. And so he provided story and photos about Sturgeon Fest in 2019. I really liked the variation on the point of view that provided.
That's right. So cute.
Treasures of Oz in 2019. So as you know, Treasures of Oz covers quite a few, 5 or 6 different places. So this is just 3 of the places that were featured in 2019. And I have a sneak preview for you. Treasures of Oz officially doesn't start this year until tomorrow. But I went out, they promoted it on the website. You can see what the places are. And I went out last week and I visited Blue Heron, which I had not known about until this year's Treasures of Oz came out. And it's on the list this year. And so I went there, and it's a beautiful place right on the Milwaukee River, as you can see. Another story that we posted that's near to you is stories about various things that are being done to restore the Milwaukee River, including the fish passage here in Thiensville. This picture is of the dam, of course, but there's a fish passage next to the dam. And the fish passage is here in this picture, and you can see this is the informational panels that are overlooking the fish passage. This is a recent story that I love this story. The Ozaukee Washington Land Trust, I'm sure you're familiar with them, and the Rotary, the Rotary Club of Mequon-Thiensville, they're called Sunrise Rotary. They hired these goats to eat the buckthorn in this woods. If you're not familiar with that idea of goats eating the buckthorn, I encourage you to go to this story. Again, if you go to the website and you Google Pukite Woods or you Google goats, you'll get this story right away. And there are 2 stories. The first story was a picture, this picture represents the first story where you can see the goats. They rushed, when they were released from the truck, they rushed into the woods and they started gobbling up the buckthorn and everything else in their path right away. And then 2 weeks later, I came back, and as you can see on the right side here, there's not nearly as much foliage left in the woods. And that's because in 2 weeks, they've pretty much stripped the buckthorn bare. And some of you may be wondering, so that you don't have to ask this question, I'll answer it. Don't the goats eat just everything and not just buckthorn? And that is true. you have to use the goats carefully because they will eat everything. They won't just eat buckthorn. So this particular woods was completely infested with buckthorn. And once the buckthorn is controlled, the native plants that are in the seed bed will resprout. That's something I learned through this project. Another story that's not too far from you all it is at Harrington Beach. This was provided by Robert Powell, who provided the pictures and the story about the observatory that's at Harrington Beach.
That story may be continued next week or next time by Scott. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about that observatory, I'm sure.
There you go. That's great.
And I'll bet you Anna can tell us a little bit about Mequon Nature Preserve too.
Excellent. Well, your sister preserve or nature center here at Mequon has provided several stories. I'm just giving you one. They do a winter frolic every winter. Some winters lately, the weather hasn't been ideal for it, but this was one a couple of years ago. And the story that they provided was written by one of their people, and I took a bunch of photographs for it. A little farther afield, I do these stories all over southeastern Wisconsin, so I could take up several hours if I showed too many of them, so I'm not going to do that. But here's one from Waukesha County that I did just this summer that's a little more on the fun side. It's a little known preserve called Badercher in Muskego, in the city of, it's a city of Muskego preserve. And the day I went there in mid-July, no one had been there, and the raspberries were completely, the raspberry bushes were solid, loaded up with fresh raspberries, ripe raspberries. It was just wonderful.
We've lost you temporarily audio-wise.
What's happening? Can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me? I don't see anybody waving.
I can hear you.
Yes?
Yes.
Mary, can you hear me? I'm not, Mary, are you
I
with
can
me?
hear you. Sue
Yes.
Carlman.
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm just going to go on. I assume we're okay then. One of the regular features that we have is what's known as featured artists, and we do featured artists who relate to nature somehow, but we have a special series of featured artists that are from a program called Art Servancy. And I don't expect you to know about this, but you might. It's a collaboration between a gallery in Port Washington, Gallery 224, and it started with just Ozaukee Washington Land Trust, but it's expanded to several different land trusts. And the land trust provides their properties, and the gallery provides the artists, and they put them together. And we have a series of artists who spend a year exploring these properties and making art that's inspired by them. And so I have put together a feature of each of the artists over 2 years now. We're going into our 3rd year. There are 12 artists. There have been 12 artists in each of the past 2 years. And you're just seeing a few of them real quickly here. This is Devin. He's at Sauk Creek Preserve in Port Washington. And what he's doing here is he's lifting his canvas out of the river. He actually put this canvas in the river and had the river paint it, so to speak, things growing on the canvas, and that became his work of art. This is Nicole. She's at Forest Beach Migratory Preserve, and she created this enormous sculpture which actually glows in the dark. It's quite remarkable. This is a photographer. His name's Andrew, and he's at Cedarburg Environmental Study Area. This is a sneak preview of Beth Stoddard, who is a current artist in resident at Fitzsimmons Woods in Milwaukee. And this is, blanking her name. Okay, I've forgotten her name, I'm sorry. But she's at Spirit Lake Preserve, and she's taking studies. She does paintings. So back to the website and the home page. If you click here to explore, you will get to this map. This is an enlargement. If you zoom out, you see all of southeastern Wisconsin, but I've zoomed it in so you can see where we are. Here is this one is Riveredge Nature Center. And if you click on this button, you will get to this page about Riveredge Nature Center. So that's true of all of the buttons on the map. So you can go anywhere in southeastern Wisconsin, you can click on all those buttons and you can find out more about each of these places. And they all have links to their own website. So if you go to this website, this is the Riveredge website, so you can learn all about it completely. So for the remainder of my talk, which is, we're getting close to it here. The remainder is a little bit of a tour, and you can probably imagine that if I tried to cover all of these places thoroughly, it would take all day, which it would. So I've selected 3 examples of parks in each county, each of the 6 counties, just 3, and there are numerous ones. And I'm only sharing a single picture from each one. And of course I could be sharing numerous pictures from each one. So this is just a flavor of what we're doing here, sharing places that you could go to enjoy the woods and nature. And I'm hoping that it inspires you to go back to the map and take a look more thoroughly at each of these places. So Bratt Woods is a fairly small, it's about 17 acres, preserve that's a Ozaukee Washington Land Trust property, right on the Milwaukee River in Grafton. Saw Creek Preserve is another Ozaukee Washington Land Trust, and very popular fishing spot, as you can see. Before I started, Mary was asking each of you where your favorite parks were. If I were to pick a favorite park in Ozaukee County, I could pick a favorite one for each county, of course. But if I were to pick a favorite one for Ozaukee County, it would be the Cedarburg Bog. I love the Cedarburg Bog. As you probably know, it's not open all the time to the general public, but once a year in the winter, and that's what we're seeing here, they open it for a special tour, and it's a hike through the bog in the winter, which makes it possible to actually walk through the bog on the ice. So this is 75 people. This was before the shutdown. We were able to all go out together and walk across the ice of the Cedarburg Bog. Washington County, this is a park on Big Cedar Lake, Ackerman's Grove, or one of the Cedar Lakes, I'm not sure which one. One of your neighbor properties, right next to, more or less right next to Riveredge, is Creech Conservancy, another Ozaukee Washington Land Trust property, again right on the Milwaukee River. This is also the Milwaukee River. This is Quass Creek Park in West Bend. Moving to Waukesha County, McWanago Park, County Park, Waukesha County Park. A property owned by the Tall Pines Conservancy. It's right on the Oconomowoc River, and the Ice Age Trail runs there, through there. I mentioned that I think that the Milwaukee area and the southeastern Wisconsin area has world-class features, and one of the world-class features is the Ice Age Trail, of course, which runs throughout the state of Wisconsin, but it skirts through our area as well. Another sister nature center of yours is Retzer out in Waukesha County. Moving down, we're going kind of circling around with Milwaukee County here, moving down to Kenosha County. One of the prime properties in southeastern Wisconsin, a state natural area like Cedarburg Bog, which is also a state natural area, Milwaukee Prairie is one of the finest, one of the few remaining prairie areas on the lake, near the lake. It doesn't quite reach the lake, but it's right next to the lake on the border line of Kenosha and Illinois. And these flowers, by the way, are lupines. A very popular park in Kenosha is Petrifying Springs. It's next to Parkside University. And another river in our area is the Fox River, and this is a park in Silver Lake, western Kenosha County, right on the Fox River. Fox River runs through western Racine County as well, so this is also the Fox River in the Tishigan Wildlife Area. I often like to explain a little bit about the different state designations. So we have, this is the DNR property, and the DNR has several designations. Some of their properties are state parks. Some of them are state forests, like the Kettle Moraine State Forest. Some of them are wildlife areas like this one. Some of them are recreation areas like Bong Recreation Area or Ottawa Lake Recreation Area. And some of them are state natural areas. And what are all these different designations? Well, for some of them overlap a little bit, but for the most part, they indicate the type of uses that are developed for these parks. So state parks have the most highly developed, well, recreation areas are pretty highly developed for specific types of recreation, like motorized recreation, boats and ATVs and motorcycles and stuff like that, sometimes, depending on the place. State parks have camping available, which most of the properties don't have. So there's a different level of activity that's available to them. The state natural area is the most undeveloped type of property. That's one that's left to the wildlife. By contrast, a wildlife area tends to be managed for hunting. So there's no hunting in a state natural area, but there is hunting in a state wildlife area. So there are a number of different designations there. Another sister nature center in Racine County is Riverbend on another river, on the Root River. And a property owned by Caledonia Conservancy, a small preserve known as King's Corner. And I like, I often use this picture, not so much because I love this place, which it's a nice place, like all of these places are nice places. But what I really love is this photograph. You know, I try to pick photographs that will appeal to people. In this case, I think it's a strong photograph, but it has a really fun story to tell. So as you can see, there's a storm front approaching in this picture. This is in Caledonia, which is in eastern Racine County, and I live in Wauwatosa. And the day that I took this picture, I was looking at the computer, at the weather report on the computer, and and there was a storm at my house already. I was looking at the weather, and I noticed that the storm had a very distinct front, and there was an edge to the storm, and there was storm on one side, and there was absolutely clear air on the other side, the eastern side. And I decided, well, maybe if I could outrun the storm, I'll get a nice picture of the storm front. And I almost never do this because it almost never works out. But in this case, as you can see, it worked out. I drove safely but fast all the way down into Racine County. And as I got close to this spot, I wasn't completely sure where I was going because I didn't know exactly where the storm edge was going to be, but I knew several possible places that I could stop. So I stopped at, I came right through the front of the storm just before I got to King's Corner, and I got out of the car and I managed to race to a nice spot where all these goldenrod were blooming in the foreground just before the storm came over. And literally, I got there, and 5 minutes later, I was drenched to the bone.
Amazing.
I got one picture for all of that trouble.
It's a great picture and a great story.
I love it. Another of my favorite parks is Lakeshore State Park. If you haven't been there, it's out in front of Milwaukee in Lake Michigan. It's hard to tell that from this view, but it's an island that was manufactured. This island did not exist 50 years ago or 30 years ago. I think it's about 20 years old. And the island was manufactured out of stone that was dug out of the deep tunnel system when the sewers were dug, the deep tunnel sewer system. They created this island, they put topsoil on top of the island, and they planted it with native prairie plantings. There are no trees on the island.
Wow.
But it's a beautiful place to go to see prairie. There's a little beach there. It's within the harbor, so it doesn't get a lot of heavy wave action from the lake. But it's beautiful on a beautiful day.
I'd say.
A private preserve is known as, it's very popular for people who know about it, is on the property of the St. Francis Seminary. It's a private property, but it's open to the public. And it's beautiful right now in autumn, especially because the colors there, like you have, are just spectacular. And my other favorite park, so I have two favorite parks in Milwaukee County. One is the Milwaukee River Greenway. And I showed you a picture of that, Ray, at the beginning. I didn't mention it by name, but I'm actually serving as artist in residence in the Milwaukee River Greenway. But my other favorite park is Grant Park. And if you haven't ever done this, you can do it closer to you in some places, like at Lion's Den Gorge or at Doctors Park. Anywhere where you can get down at Lake Michigan below a steep bluff like this. But Grant Park has the largest beach area of any park. It stretches for a long distance along the bluffs, and you can walk for a great, wonderful walk along the beach from one end of the park to the other, which is absolutely unique. And while you're doing that, you can't tell that there's any city anywhere near you. You can't hear the city, unlike most places. Mary mentioned that I wrote a book called Urban Wilderness, Exploring a Metropolitan Watershed, which was a story about the Menominee River watershed, which is where I live. And the concept of urban wilderness is an oxymoron that represents what I believe is our wealth of nature, where in our urban area, we have parks and preserves, as I've been showing you, that allow us to, for the most part, imagine that we're out in a wilderness, because they're not actual wildernesses. Because almost always you can still hear traffic or something man-made. But if you're on the beach in Grant Park, all you hear is the lake and the wind. You can't hear anything man-made unless an airplane flies over, of course, but it's just fantastic. So favorite parks, this is a favorite park.
I'd have to agree. It's a beautiful park.
It's also one of Milwaukee County's two largest parks.
Oh.
Whitnall is the largest, Grant is the second largest. Just to wrap up, I want to let you know that our project, A Wealth of Nature, is not just preserve our parks. We have 23 project partners including, thank you, Riveredge Nature Center. Appreciate that. So we'll open it up to questions at this point, but here is the URL for our website. I hope you'll go check it out. I hope you'll check out our Facebook and Instagram pages. And if you like what you see, and I certainly expect you to like what you see, I hope you'll subscribe to our newsletter, which you can do on the homepage. So I would love to answer your questions.
All right. So we'll start with having, if you want to, Eddie, if you stop sharing your screen, and then we can unmute people and let them answer their questions, but you're going to have to unmute yourselves. So go ahead and do that right now. So it's that little microphone button in the corner if you're not familiar with that.